and welcome to Dungeoneered, a podcast dedicated to discussing Dungeons and Dragons. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Josh.
Let's do this. I made it. Like, just at the last second.
To the listeners, he's saying that because we've recorded this like 5 times now, and
okay,
he just keeps laughing.
Exaggeration.
I don't think I am. I think we did do it 5 times, but now we're ready to get into the episode.
I don't know what this episode's about, and it's funny because you tell me every week, and you post cool pictures every week, and I still don't know.
Well, this week we're going to be talking about the Gith. The Gith are one of my favorite races in all of D&D. And last week we talked about the Mind Flayers. And Mind Flayers they were the captors of Gith for many, many years. Sadly, I have not been able to play a Gith in any campaign that I've played in yet. And there's a reason for that. The Gith they have a complex backstory that makes adding them into a homebrew world kind of difficult unless you really plan ahead and create a space for them. Now, the Gith aren't just one race like most others. They are split into 2, the Githyanki and the Githzerai. The Githyanki are a group of ruthless planar traveling warriors, hunting down Githzerai and Mind Flayers. They hope to take over the world and rule as the Mind Flayers did. While the Githzerai are peaceful monks learning from the experience under the Mind Flayers, hoping to bring peace to the world and prevent tyranny like that from happening again. They often attack the Githyanki and the Mind Flayers to prevent both of them from ever having enough power to actually try to take over.
Wait, aren't all Gith evil, though?
No, Gith are not evil.
I thought Gith were evil.
Well, not all Gith are evil. The Githyanki are, like, if you want to play them as a playable race, it says their alignments tend toward lawful evil. They are aggressive and arrogant. They remain the faithful servants of their Lich Queen Vlokith, and the Githzerai tend towards lawful neutral. Their rigorous training and psionic abilities requires an implacable mental discipline. So one of them is kind of evil.
They have a Lich Queen overlord?
Yeah, they have a Lich Queen. We'll discuss that later on. Little is known of the origin of the Gith as a race. Gith wasn't even originally the race's name. That name was lost a long time ago during their servitude to the Mind Flayers. Some of the ideas that I've heard thrown around for their origin is that they were human at one point, but over long times of servitude and experimentation on them, the Mind Flayers kind of turned them in to what we know now as Gith. And there are a few other ideas thrown around as well. And all of them kind of lead back to that idea of whatever they once were, it's no longer what they look like now because the Mind Flayers have changed the Gith so much. This is the Forgotten Realms wiki description of them. Gith were tall and emaciated-looking humanoids. They had pale yellow skin, sometimes with greenish or brownish tones. Their skulls were long and angular, with deep-set eyes, flattened noses, and long pointed ears. Typical hair colors included black, red, russet, and sometimes gray. And their appearance is not for everybody. They're one of my favorite races, and I know a lot of people don't like them.
You said you've never played as one? Why haven't you played as one?
Well, I've tried. I wanted to play in like Chris's campaign, where the one you're in, but it's just so much of their like racial traits and abilities are based on their cultures and how they were kind of trained from birth. And so without having their cultures somehow a part of the world, it's hard to throw them in as characters.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Like, they're hard to like incorporate into a world if you don't already have them incorporated into your world.
Or you haven't even thought about like the planes like that yet.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, during the Mind Flayers' long reign, the Gith grew slowly. They slowly kind of developed psychic defenses and whatnot as they were constantly affected by these things. And as they grew and grew and grew in their powers, they began to train harder and harder and harder and tried to get themselves as close to Mind Flayer level psionics as they could. Once they got to a point where they felt, I think we're strong enough, I think we can do this, they led this massive Thrall rebellion. Now, Thrall rebellions were not uncommon in the Mind Flayer community, but the power and the psychic defenses the Gith had developed were too much for the Mind Flayers. And within a year, they had brought this huge Mind Flayer empire, which, as I told you last week, stretched all of the inner planes. In under a year, they destroyed it and brought them to near extinction and forced them into hiding.
Are they still that big now?
The Gith? No.
Yeah.
No, they got wrecked by themselves in a civil war that split them into the Githyanki and the Githzerai.
Got it.
Which Githyanki and Githzerai literally mean. Githyanki means followers of Gith, and Githzerai means those who spurned Gith. And Gith actually comes from the name of the leader who led this rebellion. Her name was Gith. And
the witch.
No, that is Vlakith, but we're not there yet. She was one of... Okay, I'll get there later. There's a lot of stuff with that, but it's actually not the same Vlakith that's their Lich King now is not the same Vlakith that actually worked directly under Gith. Little is known of Gith's actual backstory. Some suggested she was a powerful slave that was one of the bodyguards of like a high-ranking Mind Flayer. Others say she was just a random foot soldier that just stepped up when the time was needed of her. But no matter what, she was this incredible person that helped lead this rebellion with her tactical skills. And she had such an anger in her that when they had pushed these Mind Flayers to near extinction, they kind of took a moment to breathe as they prepared to wipe out the rest of them. But a Gith by the name of Zerthamon stood up and kind of met with her and said, we should stop. We are becoming too close to Mind Flayers. We need to be better than them. And so she wanted to continue to destroy and take over and conquer as they had and rule. And he was like, no, we should go find a place to hide, just kind of go and be safe and create our society again and try to be a civilization. And this created this whole two groups that eventually over time, and there was this actual moment that kind of triggered it called it was like the something of two skies, because he's saying that Gith was saying, we can do both. We can create this great civilization and destroy all these Mind Flayers and conquer and be under one sky and do that. And he's like, no, that would be under two skies and we can't, that's impossible. And so they created this, it set off this civil war where people took sides, whether they were on Gith sides or against her.
So did they rule like all the planes during that time? So they were like the ruling empire of the time, and then
they didn't really go and conquer it at that point. It was just a attack force at that point. So they hadn't like set up in the fortresses. When they take them over, they would just wipe them out and head on.
Got it. So just kind of like a bomb and leave.
Kind of, yeah. Now, while the Civil War was raging, the Githyanki were still trying to hunt the Mind Flayers and still trying to keep up that offensive front. In the end,
they hate them that much still?
Oh yeah, they still hate them. They still have this immense hatred. Zerthamon was killed, and the Githzerai retreated to Limbo. And Limbo is the plains of chaos, which is really interesting because the Githzerai are all about inner peace, meditation, calm, and they literally are a civilization that is peace within this plane of chaos. And the Githyanki had to retreat to kind of build up their forces again, and they went into the Astral Sea and kind of took over some of the Illithid fortresses that they had already cleared out there. The Civil War was devastating to both sides, and the Githyanki had to kind of suspend their war for a bit. And during that time when they had to suspend their war, that was the time that the Mind Flayers had to go to the Underdark and kind of build up defenses down there and kind of take on this, we're about to be extinct, we need to protect ourselves.
Do the Gith know that the Mind Flayers are like hiding in the Underdark, or are they
yes. The Githyanki still send out raiding parties every so often to just, they have a goal, like kill this many Mind Flayers. I think it's like one per Githyanki, you have to kill that many Mind Flayers. And if in your party, if people die, you have to kill a mind flayer for each dead ally. So, like, one of the people I wanted to play was a Gith I called Grelkvar. And Grelk was going to be kind of a haunted one background, but he always kind of had a smile on his face. And all of his companions died. So he was sent on a team of 5, and all the rest died. So he has 4 mind flayers that he has to kill on top of the one that they were sent to kill. And so through the storyline of the campaign, he would have to kill 5 mind flayers.
That's kind of a cool idea. That's a cool concept.
Yeah. And so it doesn't even have to be the one specific mind flayer. It just has to be 5 to make up for the 4 lost people.
Yeah, that'd be a fun. I mean, that's a good like story transition for like a DM to like get you to be doing stuff, is having to hunt and chase mind flayers.
Yeah, and you're literally not allowed back in the Astral Sea or Limbo if you haven't completed your mission. So he is literally would be stuck in this plane with the party until he can do it.
Is Limbo still controlled by Gith?
Both those places are still, like, I don't think they're not 100% taken over. They're not conquered, because even though this civil war is over, they still constantly are attacking each other. And so neither of them have been able to get enough power to conquer anything.
Got it.
And the Githzerai don't want to conquer anything either. So that kind of brings that down.
Wait, do the Githzerai also want to kill mind flayers, or
yes.
They don't want to anymore?
I from what I was reading in like the player's handbook when I was first getting into these races, it sounded like they still sent out raiding parties. So my Gith that I wanted to play, Grelkvar, he was going to be a Githzerai, but he was going to be completely useless at everything Githzerai hold as important. So he was going to be more like a Githyanki, as he was going to be more of a fighter, and kind of, he was going to literally be a cavalier, that his whole thing is protecting those around him as the cavalier fighting style does. And he was kind of going to be made fun of for most of his life, that he was so different from all the Githzerai, but he still loved and held dear their beliefs, but he just didn't feel like he was one of them. And so it was going to be this fun thing where he kind of finds his place among the party type thing. Now, Gith wasn't done. When they were forced back to the Astral Sea, she still wanted to make Githyanki the most powerful that they could be. The stories say that she and her advisor, Vlakith the First, went to a group to kind of team up. And what group do you think they went to?
The Drow.
No, she teams up with the Halflings.
Wait. Oh, really?
No.
Because they can't.
Oh. No, of course I'm kidding.
Oh, you got me so excited.
No, she goes to hell and makes a deal with Tiamat for the aid of the Red Dragons. So from what we've heard, she has remained there as part of the deal. And the only people that returned were Vlakith and the Red Dragon consort of Tiamat. I don't know how to pronounce this. Ephelomon? And
I don't know.
Yeah, every leader of the Githyanki sense has been named Vlakith for this amazing acquisition of, now they are Red Dragon riders. It has boosted their power exponentially.
They're Red Dragon riders?
Yes. That is a very common mount for them. Now, they're currently at Vlakith, the CLVII. What number do you think that is?
A lot.
It's 157. So that's a lot of leaders named Vlakith.
Yeah, that's confusing. That's a lot.
And so she died, and she didn't have a replacement at the time. So she was brought back as a lich and is now incredibly powerful. And she actually has, over the thousands and thousands of years that she has continued to reign over the Githyanki, she has kind of gone mad. And now her goal is to become a god. And so that is where the Githyanki are at right now. They are stuck not stuck, they are holed up in the Astral Sea every so often sending out attackers to attack mind flayers and Githzerai with red dragons, and their leader is insane and hopes to become a god.
Is that that's actually a thing in D&D? Like Gith with dragon, like on dragons?
Oh, 100%. Yes. Literally, I was just watching the latest episode of the streamer that I watched play Baldur's Gate 3 because I don't have a PC gaming rig because I'm a console player. And so they had just gotten to the Gith group in the Baldur's Gate 3 like early access part. And of course, they have a red dragon with them.
Huh. I did not know that. That's crazy. I didn't know
there's
they,
a lot of like images. There's a lot of images of Githyanki that you can see online that they're totally riding red dragons because that is their mount.
I mean, obviously not like an ancient dragon or anything, right?
Well, so they made a deal with the Dragon Queen, with the Dragon God, Tiamat. So I think it would be
on an ancient?
Easily.
This is like boggling my mind. I had no idea that they rode dragons.
Yeah, they are very powerful because of this. What that also means that the Githzerai have become very powerful to combat this.
How do they combat this?
Oh, they're psychic powers. They have just, through their meditation and psychic powers, they have become, I'm sorry, I have just looked in our Discord and gone over to the images tab. There are 24 new messages, and all of them are very weird pictures that don't make sense to the episode, Aaron. What are you doing? Like, there's Pikachus and Iago from Aladdin, and there's Kazooie from Banjo and Kazooie. What are you doing? And there's a really tired Meowth.
It started with flumps because you said flump to start the recording, and then it went into madness. I think you can tell where it went into madness.
It really did.
And then after it went into madness, I found a cool picture of a guy attacking a purple worm, and then it went into cool pictures. And then it ended with halflings, because halflings are the best.
I mean, that is a really cool halfling with his... oh, man. Okay, I don't know what of this I can keep in the recording and what I cut out. Like, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous, Aaron.
This is what happens when I get in a mood, you know?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, we have recorded the beginning part a bunch of times. So we're kind of in this goofy mood already. So that's where we're at. Sorry if this is a sillier episode, but it seems that's the way it's going to be.
Don't worry, it's not.
Now, I did post this picture because you can find this is like one of the most popular pictures I've seen online of this Githyanki dragon rider attacking this Githzerai that has his like psychic bubble up in his meditation, and it's beautiful, and it displays the kind of difference in the two sides, just how serene he is standing against the tide of this red dragon coming at him, which is one of the most powerful dragons in D&D.
Yeah, it's a really awesome picture. I mean, let's be honest though. Having mind powers to like destroy dragons, that's pretty I think I'd pick that. That's pretty cool.
Now,
I mean, look at him. He's like flying with mind power.
Yeah. Even the Githyanki have psionic powers. It's just the Githzerai have trained it in a certain way, more of a defensive way than the Githyanki have. They're more aggressive with it.
Yeah, I mean, this is the true definition of big brain time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I wasn't really listening. That's why I just went, mm-hmm, because I'm trying to focus on this next part. Now, that's what I have for you on the Gith. Now, my idea for what we should talk about this week is we should talk about civil wars, where a group of people, for some reason, break out in a inside group war.
Yeah, it's exactly what I have written down. That was my idea. Civil wars.
Now, a good place to start for these, I believe, would be like the inciting tension. What is the thing that causes the rift between the group? Now, do you have any ideas for this?
I mean, my world has a civil war going on too, so in the campaign that I'm playing.
Well, let's jump into your world again. What's
classic?
What's the group and what's the civil war going on
Yeah.
between them?
So the Civil War in my world is very long and complex. But essentially, how it started is there was a monarchy who had a high king, and his name was High King Artem. He disappeared like I think it was like it's like 35 years ago in my world. He just vanished. Kind of had this like 6 month time period of less and less visibility, and then vanished. And essentially, what happened is the dynasty, which we talked about last week, the dynasty
Mm-hmm.
slowly infiltrated the king. The king's like
His
royal
court.
heirs, and he was captured by them.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, his court. And he was captured by them and brought to the Underdark where they live, and essentially imprisoned to keep his like innate magical energy, I guess you could say. So the king of Istol was this like really powerful being, but he was then captured by the dynasty and forced into this prison to help fuel their ancient magic over like ancient magic that controls people, which we talked about last time. So that's
Mm-hmm.
how they can like fuel and support it. So this group had formed to essentially reclaim Istol. So Istol ended up turning into this, instead of a monarchy, ended up turning into this republic, which was ruled by a council. But the council was just full of like really corrupt people who were pretty much essentially looking for power within themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
so this group called the Knights of the Vale formed this huge coalition to then fight the republic and bring back the monarchy.
Interesting. So does the king have relations that they're kind of going under? Like we're trying to promote this guy to lead?
So the Knights of the Vale, which is the rebellion group, the group
Yeah.
that is fighting Estol, they are led by a guy named Sir Oswald. He's like a knight. He was a knight under the king's court, and so he was one of the original members of his court. And so he has now formed this whole group to rebel and fight the Republic.
Well, so
So that's
what I
kind
was
of
meaning
how.
is does the group, the Knights of the Vale, have a, because they're going for the monarchy, so I assume they're going for his family. They're trying to promote his family back into power.
Yeah, no, it's more of Sir Oswald, the person who's leading it, wants to be the monarch now.
Okay, interesting. And
So he
why
wants
would
to.
they kind of follow him? Because like this is what I, in the Crusader Kings 3 game, you kind of have to have a de jure, like a claim or something for some, for to kind of get people on your side. And I never thought about it, but that actually makes a lot of sense. Is that you have to have some reason why you're going to go to war, why you're going to pull these people into your war if you're like have treaties and whatnot.
Yeah, so he has a few, but first, because he was such a high-ranking official in King Artem's court, he was essentially a vassal. Because he was a vassal of King Artem and a vassal of probably the most powerful piece of land, he is almost like a direct heir, part of that lineage essentially. But also, Estol has a big savior complex that's currently happening because Estol is now very poor. The Republic has essentially destroyed Estol because the Republic has voted in favors for things that only impact the people who are wealthy and the people who are already in power. So it kind of destroyed Estol, whereas High King Artem was a very fair and very just ruler. Sir Oswald is pretty much has gathered all these monarchs who have lost all this power. So all these vassals that were still around who lost their land and lost their power, and has formed them under his banner, promising them vassalage and a return to their lands if they retake the Republic.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, and so Estol has a group under them that they have essentially hired, which is another very complicated issue, which they're called the Burning Brand, which I think I've explained to you at least a little bit about the Burning Brand. But the Burning Brand were former prisoners that were then exiled away from Estol, and they hate Estol so much because they were imprisoned and then exiled that they have formed this group called the Burning Brand to come and destroy parts of Estol. So when they came into Estol, they started gathering more power and more power because all of these people who were poor and pretty much exploited by the Republic were like, we don't like what's going on either, so we'll join your side because for promise of prosperity, and we get to,
So are
we
they
get to
just
take
like
back our
a,
lands.
so are they just like a defensive third party, or are they?
No, so they're a bandit group essentially that has now been hired as mercenaries
By
by
which group?
Estol.
By a stole.
Yeah, Estol, who
So why?
exiled them, has
Yeah.
now
So
hired
why?
them to
Why
come
would
and
they
fight.
work with a stole? What's the logic there?
Money, and then a potential to backstab and gain even more power later.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, Estol has essentially hired the people they exiled to help fight the Knights of the Vale. Now Estol has a huge army, but Estol was already in a war and is still in a war with Gridala Shan over a bunch of different things. It's very complex, but over a bunch of different things. So their military is already weakened. So they brought in this exiled banditry force to help bolster their numbers.
Interesting. Now,
Yeah, so Stoll is engaged in all sorts of bad decisions.
yeah, I had kind of one of that type of situation in the history of my previous kind of the continent my campaign was on last time, where in the history of it, the ruler was kind of died suddenly, and the son was considered too young, and so the council kind of took over, and then they started making all these decisions, attacking people that have been allies with their nation for a long time, and different other things, all purely on the basis of it'll give us more power. And so they were fought out in a civil war like that. But I haven't actually had one as a main plot point before.
Yeah, in my campaign, it started as a main plot point, but it's kind of fallen away to destroying the dynasty because if the party defeats the dynasty, then they might be able to regain control of Estol because the dynasty has pretty much taken over their court as well.
Yeah.
So they killed the Republic. So they killed the well, they didn't kill, but they captured the High King, and then pretty much took over from there and formed this Republic in air quotes.
So what is a good way of running a civil war in a game? Like how would you want to
Well,
would you have the players be all immediately integral members of parts of it? Would they be kind of caught in the crossfire? How would you go about doing that?
yeah. I introduced it really early, like session 3, I think, like really, really early. They met a member of the Knights of the Vale and kind of became friends with them, and were taken to the Knights of the Vale's hideout to fight some Burning Brand bandits. So kind of an early level introduction to the Civil War, so they could be fighting, humanoids and not just like goblins or something.
Yeah, so just kind of have it as it feel like a basic mission, but there's more to it. Have it be just, oh, go clear out these bandits type mission, but there's actually further meaning that they will learn later that, oh, there's these people are hired by a stall and that kind of thing.
Right. And so essentially how I did it was after they first refused the mission because they were kind of suspicious of the Knights of the Vale. So their second in command, Lady Antebella, she's kind of mysterious in the beginning. So they didn't really trust her very much. They ended up rejecting that proposal, but they were still friends with the person that they met.
Mm-hmm.
And shortly after, a few sessions after, in one of the major cities that they had come to, their friend, who was part of the Knights of the Vale, was being executed by a stole for treason and for rebelling against the Republic.
That's
And
a
that
good way of getting
immediately,
them invested in it and feel like they're a part of it by
yeah,
having a friend then become caught in it.
yeah. So he was executed right in front of them, along with several
Oh,
other members of the Knights of the Vale. Yeah,
did they just let
by
it happen?
a,
Did they try to stop it? What did your players?
yeah.
How
I
did your players
mean,
react to that?
they were level like 3 at the time, so level 3. So there's not a whole lot they could do. It was
Yeah,
just kind of the Knights of the Vale, because the party refused to go kill the bandits, were spread too thin to fight the bandits and Estol at the same time, and lost the current battle that was taking place to Estol, and they got captured.
interesting.
Yep. And so then they brought the some of the leaders to show as an example to why we don't rebel against Estol.
It's a good way of having consequences for not doing something.
Yeah, I mean it wasn't like an immediate consequence to them. Like it
Yeah.
didn't, like they didn't know that, all of this was going on in the background, but because of their refusal to help fight one of the bandit strongholds, the Knights of the Vale were stretched too thin, and they lost one of the
Mhm.
conflicts to Stole. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so then it led to that whole thing. And so then they were immediately sucked into, well, Stole kind of sucks because they just executed this guy, and he was pretty cool, and it seemed like some of their ideals were pretty cool. I also Chris's character Lucian is a knight, so he plays him very like honorable, very knightly, and his character's ideals would be to return back to the monarchy, to have knighthood and vassalage and
Mm,
all that stuff.
yeah.
And so he was already kind of taking a liking to the Knights of the Vale. And so when he saw them be executed, it was kind of like, well, now these guys are my enemies. They don't want to uphold proper, proper monarchy, or even, proper feudal system even. So
So, uh, when you displayed your Civil War, did you kind of have it be a uh, open ended, so they kind of choose who they think is the good guy, or was it very clear, like Stoll's the bad guy, or did you kind of want to have it ambiguous?
it at the beginning, it's very ambiguous, because when they first met the Knights of the Vale, like I said, they were very mysterious, very secretive, but it was essentially, we have money if you're willing to kill these bandits. Like, if you do this, we'll give you money. So
Yeah.
there wasn't a whole lot invested into it at first, and then as for like the whole overarching scheme, it was definitely ambiguous as to who you want to join. If you like the Republic, if you like a republic and representatives and stuff voting on laws that you want, then you'll pick Stoll. If you wanted a monarchy, then you're going to pick the Knights of the Vale. It was only till later that they kind of found out that the dynasty was infiltrating him, which then kind of gave them a more clear choice with the Knights of the Vale.
So did the party actually have conflicting ideas on like, hey, let's not go monarchy. That sounds like a bad idea.
Mm, Not really.
Because I normally try to
Chris's
stick
character.
away from monarchies, like as a player, as somebody like when they're like, hey, do you want to go with the tyrannical monarch, or you want to go with the democracy or some sort of at least voted in system? And I'm like, yeah, let's go with the voted in most of the time.
Yeah, the problem, the few problems that arose was the monarchy had produced an incredibly, like, it's a very flourishing, very successful society with tons of rights for pretty much everybody. Like, it
Hmm.
was a very, very fair and just society.
Okay.
So when you have a group promising to return to that kind of society, it adds a lot of incentive to go back to a monarchy.
Yeah.
And the republic had led to this devastation, this widespread poverty, the enslavement of many of the minor races, the lesser races, all voted in by the council, so that kind of stuff. So their rights were voted away from them essentially.
Ah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. That does have a
that
very clear villain.
yes, the issue was is, well, obviously for most of the campaign they didn't know about a lot of that stuff, but they slowly started finding like all these like pockets of slaves and stuff of minor races, and eventually they started finding like royal decrees from the council, like decrees from the council that these new orders were to be taken effect immediately. So it became more apparent over time which one was more evil, but it definitely didn't start that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I always like to
Um,
have like ambiguous, but I mean, it's not always realistic. Like when sometimes there are people that are just in it for power, but I always like to have there be some sort of, whether it doesn't even have to be the full group that is kind of good. It might be bad people running it, but they have some sort of benefit that good people want. And so there are good people that are backing them, even though it might not be the greatest people running it. And so every side kind of has a good and a bad to it.
Well, yeah. So the Republic. So the history of the Republic of Estol, which used to be called the Kingdom of Estol, but then changed to the Republic of Estol, they have the backing of what's called the Republic of Ashan. So Gradal Ashan and the Republic of Ashan used to be a single nation, but the monarchy that rules over Gradal Ashan lost a rebellion to the Republic of Ashan. And so then Estol, the Republic of Ashan, contacted Estol for protection from Gradalishan because they've been ancient enemies. They've been enemies for thousands and thousands of years, on and off, tons of wars, just on and off these constant wars. And so Estol vowed for the protection of the Republic, and then slowly the Republic kind of the Republic of Ashan, Estol kind of liked their ideals and how they ran their nation as a republic. So voting and things like that. They kind of liked that idea, kind of these representatives that would change and impact laws for the people.
Hmm.
And so they kind of were already starting to adopt those societies. And that's why the dynasty kind of stepped in at an opportune moment to take advantage of the cultural shift that was already happening.
Mm.
So really complicated,
Yeah.
a lot of world building stuff, but that's kind of how it happened. And so then, as the cultural shift to a republic was already taking place, the dynasty assassinated the king, faking it as he became sick and ill and disappeared because he became sick. To then the full transition of dynasty power in the republic,
Yeah.
and they just kind of rode the cultural shift to we want guilds and merchant leaders and people who represent the people to sit on the council and vote in changes and things like that.
Interesting.
Yep.
Now,
And so then they do civil war.
yeah. So let's say we're starting from a group of mostly farmers, and there's kind of like a lord of their lands, and the lord has kind of a mandatory like military service thing, and it has caused some issues with some of the farmers and whatnot. Like it's their only son, they don't want to lose it because they're required help for the farm, and without them, they might not have enough food. And so there's all these issues kind of brewing. How could you make that into like a civil war and engage a adventuring party in that?
Well, I think the first thing that you probably have to do is you have to exaggerate the problems because players are players. And I think we pretty much all
True.
know what I mean, but obvious things to you are not obvious to your players. So you need to like exaggerate problems. So for example, with that situation that you gave, say they came to a town and there were already a bunch of starving people because the Lord has been either, like they don't have enough work, they don't have enough labor to work the fields, or the Lord's been hoarding food. So you need to introduce like this exaggerated problem so that the players can see it.
Yeah, and I
Once
think
you
I think
have
kind of
like a
like how you were talking about the dynasty last week. I think for to make both sides kind of be good quotation marks, or at least there be reasons to choose both sides, I would probably have the lord of the land have he require those people to kind of protect them from whether it's just like a whole bunch of goblins or some sort of outside force is trying to get in and would do a lot of damage to the farms and the farmers and whatnot. And so that's why he needs more men at this time.
a greater evil than what's
Yeah.
currently happening here,
And so
which is
that's so the
really good.
farmers just see it from their perspective. And so would the players when they first go into these cities, is they would just see the starving people, the people that you see the farmland, like you like if you have them kind of describe it as you're going in these lush farmlands, but there's only like 3 people working it. And so they have all this food. They just don't have enough people to get it. Or the people are the amount that they can get in a day is not enough to feed the amount of people that require it. And those people have other jobs that they have to do to make the money to buy the food. And so they just see it from that side and they don't see the incoming orcs or whatever it is that the king is prepared, the Lord is preparing for.
Right, and that can be definitely one way of doing it. My problem with something like that would be, one, if you're trying to run a civil war game, having an obvious good and an obvious bad, at least at the beginning, doesn't
I
usually
don't
lead
think
to
that would
war.
be an obvious good or obvious bad. Because
Well, I mean,
I think that the players could obviously side with the farmers and
and try and fight off the
yes,
invading death that's approaching.
or they could find a way to like there's many movies about like oh they train the
Yeah,
farmers to fight or whatever.
right.
There are ways to try to do it other ways.
Oh, definitely. But I think that this, at least this like example, is a little bit more clear cut because if there's a civil war, everybody's going to die and there won't be anybody left to fight the evil. So I think it would probably be a pretty quick, at least if I was a player, it'd be a pretty quick decision to get the peasants to side with with the lord of the land to then fight the incoming scourge, because if they don't, they're all going to die anyways. So
But
to have
I think that is a perfectly reasonable choice for a civil war game is to choose the peace option or try to, because I think that would be incredibly difficult, especially there are many people that are not good at looking at the big picture and they just think it there about their situation and what they see. and those people would be very hard to convince to go with the Lord. And so I think you would still have fun encounters and fun missions to do in that type of a game.
No, yeah, I definitely agree. Definitely agree. I just don't necessarily think it would be incredibly Civil War focused.
Yeah.
It's very similar to what happened in my campaign, where the Civil War took a very backseat approach. Like it kind of sat out because
Mhm.
there's this other threat that seems more important that you kind of have to address.
Yeah.
So we either quickly turn to like we're making peace deal now so that we can go and fight whatever's coming on. At least that's what I personally think would probably happen. But it could easily, again, it could easily go the other way and be really fun, kind of engaging, especially if the party were. You could easily run it though, like where you kind of slowly introduce it, so the party already is invested in helping the farmers. So you could already do that. So before you even introduce the Lord and this bad thing that's already happening, the players have already kind of invested themselves with the farmers and are fighting the
Yeah.
Lord.
And I was also
So you
thinking,
could
I
definitely
was thinking that the tension from outside would just be tension. Like it would be easily solvable once a solution happens, and so that could be taken out pretty easily once it's all worked out, and then the tensions would come to a head of we almost had this civil war. We're still starving. There's still these issues. Now solve it. Now that the other thing's done.
yeah, I know, absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, you're like I was saying before, you're going to need to introduce like a really exaggerated problem that divides two groups of people, um,
Hmm.
and you
Yeah,
can
like the
choose to be
Githzerai, the leader
ambiguous.
wants to
Yep.
go one
Yeah.
way, and
So
then you're like, no, why are we going to be just as bad as the people that we just got free from?
right. So you can choose whether you want it to be very ambiguous, or you can choose if you want it to be very clean cut and straightforward. So, for example, if you take the United States slavery, like people who are for, people who are against. Now, there's intricacies within that, but like that's your dividing line.
Yeah.
So like you can have it be very clear cut, or you can have it be kind of this mesh, this kind of like we're not sure who's in the right here, which would be more of like a lord over his citizens who is drafting his citizens to fight in a clear evil,
Hmm.
where it's kind of like this
So
mesh until you really figure out what's going on.
so to make it more ambiguous, what would you have the Lord be doing?
Well,
Could it
there's a
be like he's trying to get them for an evil war, like something where he's just trying to grab power, or how would you do that?
I mean, there's a few. I don't know in this particular situation that like we've come up with, there wouldn't really be a super ambiguous answer, unless you just threw a ton of money at the players. Like the Lord was like, "Here's money. I'll give you
Yeah.
money if you help me." Like, to me, it's a pretty clear cut way which we're going, which is going to be we're siding with the farmers and peasants unless we know the Lord is fighting a horrible evil. Then we're going to make peace and fight it together. Like, like to me, that's kind of like but I think like a pretty clean cut. But I think a really good one is always to do like government fighting. So, for example, you have a king and you have people who don't want a kingship, like who don't want a monarchy.
Hmm.
Those two are fighting, and it's like, well, who do we choose? Like, or you even do two monarchies. So one person wants to be head of the kingdom, and one person doesn't. Like one person does, like two people do. One's the king, one isn't. Who
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
choose?
So it could be going back to Crusader Kings 3. Like this person has a claim their family ruled this place for
Yep.
ages. This dude's great grandfather or whatever took it from them, and so they both have legal right to this leadership.
Right. So that's very ambiguous because then it's like you just have two leaders. One person says that I should be able to be head of this land because I have this ancient bloodline from long ago that I have proof of, like this whole thing. Like
Hmm.
my family ruled here and now they were taken over by these people who rule here. That's ambiguous, especially if you have the new bloodline is trying to take over an already successful and happy monarchy, because then the players are like, okay, well, this person has claim and the right, and we want to support. I tend to find that most players want to support the rebellion and like the people who have the rightful claim to the throne. Like what I'm saying. Like this person
Hmm.
seems good. He has the rightful heir. He should be the king.
Yeah,
But the problem is, if you introduce that society's successful, society's doing well under this kingdom, like under this monarchy, do we try and destroy that to give the person who was wronged or rightfully owned the king? the kingdom. Like it would be like another example would be like Native Americans in the United States. Like like you could easily do something like that where it's like the United States pushed them out, attacked them, like that kind of stuff. Again, there's
Yeah.
intricacies in there, but say this ancient guy, this guy's family owned this kingdom. They were the rulers. They were then taken over and killed, and a new society was then established. The new society is now flourishing, successful, and the people are happy. But this person, with his group of people, believed that hey, we were wronged, and horrible things happened to my people, and we were killed and forced to go, hundreds and hundreds of miles to, find new lands that were not rich with, not helpful to society at all, like poor soil. Like we were forced to essentially scavenge for our living, and
Yeah.
now we want our claim back. That immediately introduces a very ambiguous: do we help the successful society who just wants to remain successful, or do we help the people who are seeking their lands back and were forced to live in a place that was not fit for living?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It immediately becomes very difficult. Well, I mean, we want to do right and help the people who were forced out of their homeland, and forced to live on certain a certain area, or kicked out or banished. But we also want to continue to have a successful empire. And if we attack and we try and take this over, we could ruin the success of the empire and the happiness of the people.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Yes. So I mean, like I said, you're going to need a clear-cut objective. If you want it ambiguous, you need to introduce two parties, one that's been wronged, but one that's successful and is happy. If you want to make it clean cut, this group is trying to save its people from the tyranny of this group. Like you can, and then you can always play around and add intricacies as you go. It doesn't have to start out really complex either.
Mm-hmm.
You can always add stuff, and especially when you hear your players talking.
Yeah, I always love hearing like having like the Githyanki and the Githzerai, where the two groups are so different. And sometimes I would always love to have it where the group that is quotation marks evil, or at least its goals are not as good, the people that you experience in that culture they feel like better people, quotation marks. Like that's hard to say, but like with the Githzerai, these people they're these monks. They don't want to hurt people. They kind of go for this thing, and having them be the ones that kind of are fighting for this more ambiguous thing is always fun. And then having the really militaristic, angry, we deserve this people be the ones that are in what would quotation marks be the right.
No, I think that's like a very good base and a foundation. And then you can always add on, like if we were to take the situation that I just brought up, the ambiguous one, where like the kingship is successful, but this group who was forced out and rightfully owns it wants it back. You could then introduce, well, the kingship, the reason they invaded and took over your place was because there is this horrible, even worse empire that is slowly encroaching on everybody's lands, and we took yours over to join forces in order to try and combat this. And so then you just immediately add on another layer. That's another easy way to just continue to stack complexity. There's just you can always add a bigger threat to add complexity.
Yeah.
Or you can keep it ambiguous if you want and have just the whole combat revolve around that civil war. Now,
Yeah, and there can be
the
whole
issue then
campaigns run all the way to level 20 where the whole time you're just dealing with a civil war.
The issue becomes, how do you run like combats and stuff in a civil war? Do you like make mass battles that your players are a part of? Do you make simple battles that your players are a part of? What do you like? How do you
I think
do
the
that?
answer for that is really based on the group that you're playing with. Like we had some real fun when there was a city, I forget what it's called now. It was our first campaign, and it was being attacked on multiple sides by the like king of the area, I think. And we had to defend it.
Well, how Chris did it was
the other way around. We were attacking it, and they were defending.
We were attacking as a rebellion of people who wanted their rights back from the Baron of the city. But the Baron of the city was trying to hold off this huge force that was invading, and we ended up joining together to fight the huge force.
And he kind of made up some really good rules to work to have a large battle But then as we moved in and moved our squad into this certain area, then it became a small scale battle real quick where we had to figure a way to, because what our job was to do was to pierce the lines and deal with the wizards behind casting. And so we would have to break through the front line and then find a way to just damage the wizard and then run. So kill the wizards
Right.
and run. And so that was actually really fun because it would go from these large scale movement. We see all the troops moving on the battlefield to us moving in quickly between two squads, trying to get it, and then running out. We get this fun small encounter battle.
Yeah, so that's how I'd personally run it, where I would essentially probably do like D100 based, like grid combat of the war that's going on. So you have like individual squadrons that can move around the map and fight. And then I would have like individual objectives for the party to do single combat. So we want the individual party to go and kill the catapults in the back or the siege equipment, or we want the individual party to go and fight, one of the generals or something, very similar to how Chris did it. I think that's probably your best bet.
Yeah.
But you can do either or. So you can go all the way to the one side where it's only objective. So only like single combat objective based, where you have the army just kind of a thing in the background, where the players, you just do a single combat to go and fight like an important member, like a general or something. And then once they defeat that, the army kind of dissolves type of thing and flees. You can do something like that. Or you can just do purely like moving squadrons around and do, simple rolls that way if you wanted to. So, but I think a mix is really good where you can still see what's happening on the overall battle, but then have like individual objectives for your party to go and deal with during the battle.
Yeah, and I think that was I mean, Chris is a tactical guy, and so he kind of knows these different tactics and things. And so the way that where he would roll for all these group successes, where all these little squads where they had their small little skirmishes across the whole battle, it really created this really living feel to the battle by having all of these little squadrons also still you literally see the progress as you all take your turns, quotation marks, as you're these squadrons. You're taking your turns and you take out these guys, you scoot in to take their place and keep fighting forward, and then you get surrounded and all these things, and it felt like a really good battle.
Yeah, so how you do something like that is essentially what you do is you make individual squadrons, and then based off of how good the squadron is, you add like a modifier to your roll. So for example,
Yeah.
just like somebody who's really strong as a character, like essentially just make a character sheet but for your squadron. So
Yeah, all you really need is like a defense and a strength and a attack stat.
So you give your squadrons HP, you give them a plus to hit, and you give them AC. Essentially, like a success, how successful they are, like a gauge to how successful they are. You then roll. So, like for example, a mercenary company versus peasants. A mercenary company has better armor, better equipment, better chance to hit. Peasants are worse, and so then you just have them roll against each other to see who does more damage, and then based off that, kind of move the battle map around. And that's pretty much what we did.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be complex. Like I know Matt Colville came out with rules for Kingdoms and Warfare and whatnot, and in the oh man, I forget what his first book's called. But you don't even need something that complicated. But I'm sure it's good rules. I have it. I've just never read his warfare rules. But just having something as simple as this, it creates such a great encounter for the party, even though it doesn't have to be as complex as something like full on rule set for war.
No, yeah, and then with those like single objective encounters, it kind of adds a little bit more complexity to the game, because then your group has like certain objectives that they need to go and accomplish during the war. So then it like kind of breaks up the monotony of just like moving squadrons around a battle map.
This is one of the reasons why I just love D&D as a rule set, as a game. It's so wide open in its like ability to do things. Like the way that we were talking about the running the little squadrons with the to hit and the AC and all that. Those are still just the D&D rules. They're just used a little twist. And there's just so much freedom in it.
Yeah, you can literally just essentially make a character sheet but for an entire squadron, and then roll to hit for your squadron. It's a little bit tricky because each squadron's always going to do damage to each other. So like a group of peasants rolling a d, like say if the mercenary AC is like 18 and they roll like a 10, they're not going to hurt them, but they're always going to do some damage. But based on those rolls, so for example, if your mercenary AC is 16 and the peasants roll 10, and the mercenaries, when they attack, roll a 20 versus like a peasant's 11 AC, you can always say the mercenaries, you can just essentially calculate that, and you can just say the mercenaries are, destroying the peasants. Like they're pushing the flank very, very hard in favor of, like your side, if you're the side of the mercenaries. So, and then you just have multiple squadrons in that battlefield. So like your right flank, your left flank, your central flanks, like like you can do all sorts of cool stuff with that, just with simple rules like that.
Yeah, wars can be scary to think about at first, but once you run them and you kind of do it like this, it's not as scary. It looks like you're doing so much, especially to your players. Like they're like, "Whoa, how are you running all this?" But it just works. It's really good.
Yeah, it's really simple. It's easy to run because you just have 8 squadrons on one side, 7 on the other. Like you just make 7, sets, 8 individual rolls to see who comes out on top.
I think it's really fun to run as like a big finale as well. Like that's what I think I'm going to do for my current campaign. When they kind of get to the end and they're kind of going for this huge fight, it's going to be like this. And instead of, if any of you have watched the Critical Role ending of campaign 1, like that kind of how they had to fight through all this stuff to get to the big bad, it'll be that way, but through this war, they have to kind of find ways through the flanks and through the ranks to get to, in my case, the spoilers, everybody, Fariana, the god of divination, and they're gonna fight through this to this person that is the big bad in the back, and it'll be this very intense moment because all these things they're going to be really high level players, but they're also going to be very high level enemies they're facing against.
Right, and Critical Role is the last arc that they did. It was a really good example of war, but only single objectives, because Matt Mercer didn't do any fighting or any war. It's just the party had sole single objectives that he focused on to move them through the war, and then kind of move the war with them.
Yeah, and it still felt like this is war.
Right, so you can still do it just individual objective based if you wanted as well. So Critical Role is a really good example of how he did that. Where you're just running through this mass chaos of battle, trying to avoid with skill checks and things like that, trying to avoid to get to your objective. So you can easily do it that way too.
Yeah.
And then only have a single combat versus, the general or the bad guy or the lich in Critical Role's case, like that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of when you hear Civil War, you immediately think of the war aspect, and you're like, well, crap, how do I run a war? And it's easier than I think a lot of people, like once you sit down and actually do it, it's easier than you think. So
yeah. Well, thank you all for listening to episode 5 of Dungeon Nerd. We've made it to episode 5. We are going to be looking for sponsors and whatnot, so we might have ads in our future episodes, but I don't think we have enough viewers to get any yet. But our feelers are out there, so that could be coming soon.
Yes, sir.
Thank you all for listening, and see you next time.
Bye.
There we go.